Yo YouTube, what's going on? It's your boy SalvationsElite. We are back with another video, guys. And today, finally, we get the OpTic news that we've all been waiting for, kind of. So, we're getting the OpTic news that we've all been waiting for the past 2 years, not the OpTic news that we've all been waiting for the past month and a half. Okay, so we finally get the beef about OpTic versus Infinite Esports, what's been going on with that. Obviously, it relates to what's going on right now with Infinite Esports and Immortals a little bit, because it explains some of the tension between OpTic, well, more specifically between Hecz and between Infinite Esports. And so obviously it's still very relevant to what's happening, but it's also extremely interesting and a really good insight into what's been going on lately in the whole OpTic world. So the goal of today's video is basically just to break down this 2-hour conversation into like a 10-minute conversation and give you the gist of what happened with OpTic Infinite and where that might take us moving forward in the next few days. So obviously, as you guys probably know by now, Hecz and Hitch uploaded an Eavesdrop's podcast where they talked about all of Infinite versus OpTic like the past 2 years, and they talked briefly about, just very hinted at, like a few other things throughout the podcast as well. And I mean, one of the things was that they said that May 31st we're basically going to know, kind of confirming we're right on the eve, no pun intended, about what is happening with OpTic and Immortals and Infinite Esports. So we should know within the next few days, more than likely, about what's happening between Immortals and Infinite. Apparently just don't understand OpTic at all, which is absolutely insane. And obviously we're gonna talk about all that today. So real quick, tonight after this video goes live, I'll be working on and uploading a video for the community tournament, announcing the next community tournament, which is on Saturday in a few days here. So just be on the lookout for that. I'll just be going through how you enter and all the rules and everything else. So again, look out for that. Click on that when that comes out. And I'm excited for the next community tournament. When it comes to OpTic, the most important things to understand, first of all, the 3 most important characters are Hecz, OpTic J, and Chris Chaney. That's kind of who they talked about the most throughout the podcast. It was like an hour and a half, 2 hours of conversation about OpTic, and those are the 3 guys they talked about the most overall. So basically, at the beginning of 2017, Hecz used all of the money from sponsorships and pumped that straight into the esports teams so that the sponsorship money would pay the salaries of the esports teams. But during that time, all of his competitors like FaZe, whatever, Cloud9, whoever, all of the big esports orgs were selling out to investors. So the investors' money, aka what Hitch would be calling fake money, is what now the esports orgs were using to generate their payrolls and pay off the expenses of the org. So around that same time is when OpTic started having some internal issues, and that's when they referenced the Call of Duty team. And they said during the summer of 2017, which would have been during Infinite Warfare, interestingly enough, when OpTic was still really good, is when the OpTic Call of Duty team started having problems. But it was kind of they didn't really say it, but apparently that must have been masked over by the winning. And I mean, the team ended up winning champs, and apparently they were still having issues during that summer. So then similarly in OpTic, they were having issues at the Scuff House. Kind of the chemistry at the Scuff House was real low, and there wasn't much content coming out of it. And that's when Proofy joined to kind of reignited the spark for the content house. And Hecz and Hitch both agreed that was pretty important in reviving OpTic for at least a little while during 2017. So to keep up with all the other esports orgs at this time, this is when Hecz is starting to meet with investing groups and potentially, considering selling some of OpTic to get that investment. And during that time, he actually did meet with Dan Gilbert, and the Cavs ownership group is the team that eventually Nadeshot decided to go with for 100 Thieves. So, I mean, it's interesting that was kind of all happening at the same time, and Hecz decided to go with Infinite Esports. Unfortunately, they didn't really talk about why he chose Infinite Esports, which was kind of unfortunate, because I wish we would have been able to hear more about why Hecz decided to go with Infinite, who really sucks. I mean, Hecz in the past and in this did take blame for why OpTic is where it is today and making those decisions, but he didn't say why he made those decisions. So that is something to consider. So the biggest issue is what went wrong. Why did OpTic end up where it is today? Why were there so many controversial decisions made, and why does the ownership do what it does? And so that's kind of what they started diving into now after they kind of went through that for the first hour. So when Hecz sold the majority share of OpTic to Infinite, he thought they were all on the same page. So Hecz has always seen OpTic as like an entertainment company or an entertainment organization that also happens to be very good at esports. But apparently this is where the divide happened, is that's what he thought Jay and Chaney thought, but apparently Chaney and Jay kind of more thought that they were an esports org who happened to do content. And that's where the decision making and the issues really started rising, because Infinite made some big promises early on. That's what Hitch was talking about, and they've talked about that in the past on the Flycast, was that Infinite talked about having offices overlooking Dallas, and they even toured some, and this is where they said that they were going to be, was these awesome offices downtown Dallas overlooking the downtown. That was massive, and Hecz was like, this is going to be perfect. And basically Hecz said it was like, imagine the Hecz quarters now, but way bigger with all of the content teams there, and it was basically just a content haven. And that's what Hecz envisioned all along, and that's just not what happened. So now this is when guys started moving down there. This is when Hitch and the content team started moving down there, and they were just all incredibly disappointed. They were shocked to see the kind of small offices. It was like a corporate setting. There were 70 people they had never even met before. So this went from being like an operation of like a few digital guys that Hecz had hired and Hecz to being 70 corporate dudes with people they had never met before. This is when decisions started being made without Hecz being asked about it or Hecz being even informed about it whatsoever. And like, he had trusted OpTic J to kind of represent him and represent OpTic in a good way, but Jay just didn't see OpTic in the same way that Hecz saw OpTic, which, you know, at the time wasn't a huge problem, but when now Hecz isn't the one making decisions and Jay is, that's when the problems really started happening. And that's when Hecz really started having a huge disconnect with Jay and with Cheney about decisions. And that's when the Halo team started coming up. And that's when Hecz heard that they were considering dropping the COD team. Like, the disconnect that you have to have as Infinite to consider dropping the Call of Duty team, like, Hecz was floored. He's like, you have to be, there's no way, you're joking, you know, there's no way. And then Hecz said that he would leave OpTic, he would leave if that was what happened. But what Hecz didn't know at the time is that that's really what Infinite wanted. Infinite wanted Hecz gone, and they tried to lure him away with a few other like side businesses that he could open up and start, but he never took the bait. So Infinite dropped the Halo team, and I mean, this is when basically everyone started disconnecting. Hitch and Roger had a content meeting with OpTic J and Cheney, and this is when Hitch said he realized that there's no hope, that at that point there's no way this is getting better. This was right when OpTic decided to black out all of their profiles, so they made all their profiles black, and they were basically protesting the dropping of the Halo team. And there was a really negative connotation around the office. The culture of OpTic was pretty negative right now, and basically Cheney and OpTic J blamed that on the content creators, that if they would have just embraced what was happening, then it would have all been fine, and there would have been no problem. But Hitch was like, wow, they are so disconnected from what is actually happening. There's no hope. Since then, they've kind of been coasting, and Hitch has just decided this is what it's going to be. It's just going to be terrible. That's basically where they're at. And Hecz said he hasn't really talked with OpTic J in a long time, like almost a year or so. And Hecz is very disconnected from any operations of OpTic at this point, or Infinite. But he said he's fighting for OpTic all he can, but they can't say much right now, but we'll know more soon. And that's kind of where we're at with the Infinite, OpTic, and Immortals situation. Like, apparently now Hecz is for sure trying to get OpTic back, but I have my doubts. I just don't think it's going to happen at this point with Infinite, because it seems like they have a really, really sour relationship. And so it's more likely that Infinite will sell to Immortals, and then Hecz will try to deal with Immortals and try to get OpTic or the brand back in some way through that. So we'll see. We're going to know more soon. Like I said, a few days and we'll know. So I'll post a video about that whole situation when that finally goes public. And then again, the community tournament, that video will be going live in a few hours after this video goes live. So make sure to stick around and check that out and have your notifications turned on for that. So if you guys enjoyed the video, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you guys really enjoy it. I really, really do appreciate it, as always, guys. I'm trying to do this long term, and I cannot do that with you guys. As always, I really, really appreciate all the support. But as always, guys, I'm your boy SalvationsElite, and we'll see you next time. I'm out.